Coming in at number 5, we have Frankenstein Castle. The Frankenstein Castle is a hilltop castle that sits in Odenwald overlooking the city of Darmstadt. It is thought that this castle was the inspiration for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein novel. The name Frankenstein means stone of the Franks. The name is often used for castles in this region. The castle was built in 1252 by a ruler by the name of Lord Conrad. The castle was enlarged and modernized over the years. During the 18th century, the castle was used as a refuge and hospital ward. Following this, the castle fell into ruins. There are a few myths and legends at the castle. There was a man named Johann Conrad Dippel who reportedly was born in the castle. As he grew up, he became a professional alchemist. As well as this, he became intrigued by anatomy. There are rumors that he started to experiment using human bodies. Even more than this, they said that he attempted to reanimate his experiments using lightning. The people didn't approve of his experiments. The local people still tell stories of Dippel, including Mary Shelley's grandmother. It is thought that this was the basis of a story that is well known today. There are many tales like this from the castle. It seems to have seen a lot of phenomenal things since it was built. There is also the story of Lord George and the dragon. In the 1800s, it is said there was a dangerous dragon that lived in the well. Every night it would crawl from the well and make its way to the local village where it would eat the peasants. They live in fear of the dragon taking more of them. One day a knight named Lord George came through town and they pleaded with him to end the dragon's reign of terror. The next day he put on his armor and rode up to the castle to find the well. He found the dragon and the two fought for hours. They were both ready to pass out from exhaustion when George landed the final blow to the dragon. As he fell, he struck the knight with his tail, which contained poison. The village was so relieved and happy that the dragon was gone, they gave George an honorable burial. To this day you can visit and pay respects to him. It is said that today the ghosts of these tales haunt the castle. Although the castle is in ruins, the stories and spirits still remain. If the Frankenstein story is anything to go by, these are some spirits that you should avoid at all costs. You won't want a reanimated soul coming after you or latching onto your vessel. Coming in at number 4, we have Black Forest. The Black Forest is a large mountain range in southwest Germany. With such an ominous sounding name, it should come as no surprise that the mountain is considered to be haunted. The local folklore tells of ghosts, witches and werewolves. Some even claim that the devil haunts the forest. One of the now most famous stories is that of Der Grobman, who most probably don't know was the origin of Slenderman. The story goes that Der Grobman was a fairy who lived in the Black Forest. The local children were warned if they wandered into the forest they would be taken. For children who did go in the forest despite the warning, the tall man would chase them throughout the forest until he finally caught them. He would often prolong his search to taunt the children. Once he had them in his clutches, he would steal them away. They would never be seen again. His appearance is tall, incredibly thin with multiple upper limbs like that of a spider. It is said he can easily hide behind the trees, making his limbs stretch out like branches of a tree. There are even some woodcuts of the creature reaching back to the 16th to 18th century. There is evidence reaching back even further in time. A journal entry was found of a distraught parent. There is a long history of Der Grobman wreaking havoc on the local community. It is believed that this creature still lives in the Black Forest. The local residents still warn about children wandering off from their family. They try to warn any tourists who would want to camp in the forest or go for a hike overnight. Unless you want to meet the real life Slenderman, I would avoid this on your trip across Germany.
Number 3 on this list is the Rue de Chantre. This is considered by most to be the most haunted streets in France. It's located in Paris on the island and is right next to the Notre Dame Cathedral. This street is said to be haunted by the ghosts of many children. As with most ghost stories, this didn't come out of thin air, but from a horrible tragedy that took place on this street just over 100 years ago. In the early 1900s, there was a hotel that was located on this street. This hotel didn't really act as a hotel though, because during that time there was a massive outbreak of tuberculosis. The children in the area who had come down with the disease were sent to this hotel to quarantine. They were locked in the bedrooms of this hotel and couldn't leave at any point for risk of infecting other people. Some children died during these quarantines, which is already bad, but the main tragedy happened roughly a decade later in 1910. In 1910, there was a great flood of Paris where the river Seine overflowed and flooded the city. All the children that were currently locked inside their bedrooms at this time drowned during that flood. Nobody knows for sure the exact number of children who died in this tragedy, but it was certainly enough to make a spiritual imprint on the street. Now their souls go without rest and live along the street. People have heard the laughter and also the crying of children. They have heard the muffled screams as if they're screaming through water. They've also seen these children before peering out at them from around corners, looking extremely sad and lonely. The spot acts as an attraction for supernatural hunters, but a landmark that I wouldn't recommend visiting. Number 2 on this list is Mont Saint-Michel. Mont Saint-Michel is one of the most beautiful and unique castles on the entire planet, in my opinion. How it's constructed and where it's located, it almost doesn't even seem like something out of real life. This castle is located off of the Normandy coast, and the only connection that it has to France is a road that goes underwater when it's high tide. How this place got made has a bit of a supernatural story to it. Apparently, the archangel Michael appeared to Saint Aubert in a dream and told him to start building here. When he resisted, Michael burned a hole right in his head. After this incident, the castle began its construction, and it took quite a while to become the beauty that we have today. It was a work in progress, with more things being added over the years. Now, because of this castle's location directly in the water, it is extremely hard to attack and was never captured during the 100 Years' War. During said war, one of the major commanders of this castle was Louis d'Estourville. His ghost is one of the most common sightings at this place. He apparently is responsible for the killing of thousands of English soldiers and had battles that were so deadly the water around them would turn red with blood. He's said to patrol the castle and act as a watchman of sorts for intruders and people posing a threat. Similar to our previous entry of the horse, one of his main objectives is to keep the castle safe. He isn't the only ghost at this spot though. The ghosts of monks can also be seen praying and meditating at this location. For a long time, this castle housed several hundred monks until they were ultimately kicked out from the space. Their spirits still linger in this place though, although they aren't nearly as frightening as the weathered war general, in my opinion. Number 1 on this list is the Paris Catacombs. The Paris Catacombs is unlike anything else on the entire planet and is the breeding ground for scary stories. These catacombs are a collection of tunnels that are underneath the city of Paris and stretch for over 2,000 acres. The tunnels act as an underground cemetery where they house over 6 million dead bodies. This is one of the largest collections of the dead in the entire world, and if that wasn't enough, you can actually see their skulls as they all line the walls. These catacombs are extremely difficult to navigate. Seeing as there are over 2,000 acres of them and it's underground, people have reported getting extremely lost when they're trying to explore them. This is part of the reason why only a portion of them are open to the public today. But all of this has led to a plethora of ghost stories and legends over the years. For instance, in 2004, a group of police officers were investigating an area of the catacombs that was closed to the public, and they came upon something unexpected. A bar, a living room, a workshop, and a meeting area for over 20 people, they were all found. This was alongside a PA system, a camera system recording the area, and a pirated means of electricity. All of this was more than suspicious, but when the officers returned a few days later with some more people, everything was gone, except for a note that read, "Don't search." This isn't all there is to the catacombs though. In the 1990s, a group was searching through them and found a video camera lying on the ground. They picked it up and examined it and saw that there was a recording. The recording was clearly of a man who was very lost in the catacombs and extremely frantic. Scary voices could be heard in the background, and the heavy breathing of this man indicated his panic. Finally, the camera fell to the ground and we could hear the man scream. These are just 2 of the more famous stories to come from these catacombs, but so many other ones of ghosts or demons haunting the area have come from this place. If you were to ever go here, then make sure you have a strong sense of direction and a flashlight, because the last thing you would want is to get lost in an underground haunted graveyard.
In at number 5 we have Berlin's Citadel. The Citadel was built in 1559 and is known as one of the best preserved military structures in Europe. It was originally built to protect Spandau from attack, built specifically to have no blind spots, giving an advantage on all sides in the event of an attack. The Citadel has seen a lot of destruction and war since it was built, but the most famous ghost to live there is the spirit of Anna Sido. Anna was married but had a love affair with Joachim II, the local ruler at the time. As the ruler was dying, he asked his son to take care of Anna. The affair had been frowned upon, but as both of their parents had passed, they had grown closer before he got sick. When he passed, his son didn't keep his promise. He immediately imprisoned her in the Citadel. No one ever saw Anna again after that. There was no explanation as to where she had gone or if she had been punished for her love affair with the ruler. There had been reports from visitors of the White Lady, a ghost seen walking around the Citadel late at night. Some felt a sudden cold breeze and feeling of dread while walking around the grounds, but still there was no explanation. renovation. Years later, the Citadel was a big tourist attraction and renovations took place. While they began to renovate, they found the remains of Anna. She had been walled into a cell and left there. This seemed to confirm the rumors that she was the White Lady for all these years. Some people have seen her late at night, but others have felt her presence. Even after she was found, her spirit had remained. If you visited today, you might catch a glimpse of her if you were to be there after nightfall. Coming in at number 4, we have Svitkov Castle. The origin of Svitkov goes back to the prehistoric times. A fort was built there in the 1st century AD. It sits on the edge of a lake covered in all sides by water, making it the perfect place if you're worried about intruders. The castle was built in the early 13th century by King Otakar. It is not known when it was built, but the first written mention of the castle was in 1234, when it was owned by the King of Bohemia. It had many owners throughout the years, being seized in wars and passed to new rulers. It is now owned by the National Heritage Institute and is open to guests. It is regarded by locals as the creepiest place in Germany. Many refuse to visit or leave before it gets dark, as not to disturb the spirits they believe to live there. They believe that the castle is home to a dark supernatural entity. They believe it had been since prehistoric times and has never left the land. There are often voices heard from around the castle. Technical faults happen, often with no explanation. It's also been said many animals refuse to go into the building and act strange on the land outside the castle. There have been many times where the staff had lit candles to light up the halls when night falls. There have been times when every candle had been blown out at once, sending chills down the spines of anyone in the area. The most haunted part of the castle is the main tower. There are reports that if you sleep in the tower, you will pass away within the year. There are at least 2 confirmed cases of this happening throughout the castle's history. Coming in at number 3, we have Els Castle. Els Castle is nestled in the hill of Germany. It is still owned by the families who originally built it more than 33 generations ago. Els Castle is one of the only castles left which has never been destroyed by the events of the medieval era or subsequent wars. The house is split into 3 sections due to the 3 families who built on the land together. The Rubinach and Rodendorf sections of the home are open to the public, but the Kempenich branch of the family uses the other third of the castle. The public can visit to view the treasury. They have gold, silver and other historic artifacts, including an armory with weapons. The castle is a popular tourist attraction and not just for its beauty and history. It is also a hotspot for ghosts. Although the castle has never been destroyed due to war, it has still seen its fair share of battles and tragic events. It is said that if you were to visit the castle in the later hours, you would see the night patrol. Only there isn't any patrol, or at least none dressed in full night gear standing in formation like you might see. It is rumored that the ghosts of past nights still patrol the land. They might have died while standing their ground, refusing to leave their post in their death. They still keep watch over the castle. They have been seen walking around looking for any possible intruders. Coming in at number 2, we have Binhus Barracks. The town of Binhus includes a lot of medieval structures, including a castle from the 12th century. They also have a city wall that was mostly knocked down during war, along with many old homes that were used during World War II. When the last member of the family who built and owned the town died, there was a 35-year conflict over who would have the right to inherit it. The town has seen a lot of battles and conflict for a small town situated close to Frankfurt. It seems the land here was sought after and people were willing to fight to get it. The town still stands today with the remains of its past, a little rundown but still standing. It is believed that areas of the town are haunted by the ghosts of World War II soldiers. There have been classic signs of paranormal activity reported by locals and those who happen to pass through the town. Lights in homes turn off and on by themselves, even ones that are unlived in. Others have heard stomping footsteps with no source. It sounds like a great number of soldiers marching all at once, but if you were to investigate, you would see nothing there to create the noise. The most terrifying part of the hauntings are the voices. They have been heard in multiple homes. They often come from the basement like a whisper. When you hear the voices, you are filled with fear, as if the voices are scared of being found out. There is also an individual ghost in the area. A woman's voice has been heard speaking backwards or in some language no one could understand. It has been reported that a witch was burned at the stake in the 19th century, and it's believed she is still there. Some say she seduced and attacked several German soldiers in an attempt to protect her land when they were staying in the town. The town is full of history that might intrigue you to visit, but be warned there are many spirits trapped here and they might not all be so friendly. And finally, in at number 1, we have Kranbury Castle. Kranbury Castle was built in 1170 to fortify the area of Kranbury. The medieval building was acquired by the military and used for intelligence purposes during World War II and the Cold War. It has over time been restored to its original state to preserve its history. During its military use, it gained a lot of negative stories and people viewed it as somewhere to avoid at all costs. After the war, it was turned into a prison camp for war criminals. It's reported that the castle has seen a lot of death. People may have been tortured for information or to find out their involvement in the war. Either way, the energy here was evil. Since this period of time, there have been reports of paranormal events happening frequently. There is even a bunker that was built under the castle to contain the secretive things happening here. This links to other buildings in the area. They use this to smuggle prisoners under the castle. If you were to visit the castle, or if you brave the bunker, if you can find it, you would experience some intense paranormal activities. Screams have been heard from around the castle, screams that are begging for help or for mercy. There have even been ghosts dressed in military uniform walking around the castle late at night. There is a lot of mystery here and secrets that people wanted to hide from the public. You might get surprised if you were to investigate too much into what happened here.
Number 5 on this list is the Buda Labyrinth. Buda Labyrinth is a series of tunnels that are all connected under Budapest. It's a naturally forming system that humans have cultivated. They've used this place for many different purposes since ancient times. Storage and shelter are right up there as being some of the biggest. They've also, however, hosted some pretty dark and disturbing things here. These tunnels have been used as torture chambers before. They've been used as a prison before, and even a dungeon back in the day. Due to some of these darker times that the tunnels have seen, it's believed that there's some residual dark energy that resides here, and the tunnels themselves are ultimately haunted. Some of the most commonly spotted spirits in these tunnels are that of 3 women. A while back, 3 female skeletons were found in the depths here. The cause of death was never fully confirmed, but it was believed by how they found them that it would have been horribly brutal. These 3 ghosts haunt this place all the time, and there are even stories about how they used to take people. They would leave the confines of these tunnels and drag unsuspecting victims down here to die. That hasn't happened for several hundred years though, so I think that we're all pretty safe in that regard. They aren't alone down here though. The souls of those who were tortured to death still linger here and oftentimes make themselves known to visitors. Disembodied voices, screams, moans, the feeling of someone's hands grazing over you as you walk past. All of these are very common occurrences down here. We've just seen it time and time again where a place sees a little bit too much darkness and hate and then becomes haunted. The Buda Labyrinth is definitely one of those examples. Highly recommend keeping it off your itinerary if you're traveling to Hungary anytime soon. Number 4 on this list is Witch Island. Yeah, literally a place called Witch Island obviously is going to be making the list. There's an ancient legend that surrounds this island which has given it its name. It was a classic case where people were thought to be witches and were wrongly accused of such and then ultimately put to death. Let's Travel says, it might seem like a pleasant and relaxed place, but there is a creepy story following this place. Szeged was suffering from a serious drought and the locals were praying for that. Suddenly one day, rain starts with chunks of ice falling from the sky and many locals were convinced of witchcraft. For that reason, 12 people were caught believing that they were witches. They killed them, and since then, locals say that they hear desperate voices crying for help on the riverside. Apparitions are also seen super regularly. These are just normal people too, or at least that's what people think. It's pretty much common knowledge at this point that these women weren't witches at all, but just regular people. These ghosts that show up are desperate and in need, and they look really sad. They probably won't hurt you, but they'll definitely make you feel something. I'd stay away from this island if you can.
Coming in at number 3, Osnabruck. Osnabruck was once the site in a major pagan temple and burial area. The pagans decided that they would attempt to convert the German people to the Christian faith. This led to a massacre taking place at the temple. The local forces took the lives of those there, including the priests. They then desecrated the graves and broke their altar stones. The pagans built their temples and buried the dead on sacred land. It is believed that this act disturbed the deep magic infused in the land. Now every year during the winter solstice and summer equinox, something strange happens on the land. Strange orbs of light have been seen moving around the area. Screams are heard from miles away. Stains appear on the stones that still lay there today. Although the town have now been built away from the graveyard, you can still visit today. Many locals avoid the land as the spirits there seem angry about what happened to their descendants. It is thought these spirits wield great power and could have revenge when and if they choose to. If you do choose to visit, you need to be warned to be respectful. Do your research before and careful when you arrive. Many have reported seeing terrifying things or feelings like being watched while there. No one visits during the solstice and equinox as this is when the spirits are the most active. Coming in at number 2 we have Peacock Island. Peacock Island is situated in the River Havel in Berlin. In 1685, chemist Johann Kuhnel was given financial aid to build a glass foundry on the east of the island. Here he discovered how to produce artificial red glass. When he left the island in 1692, it remained unused for about 100 years until 1793. In 1793, the Prussian King Frederick built the castle for himself and his mistress. This was then passed down through the family and used for many different reasons, including being used as an exotic farm. Although the island has a long and exciting history, there are claims it is the original Johann Kuhnel who inhabits the island long after her death. It is claimed that Johann was not only into creating glass, but that he experimented with dark magic. It is believed that through his experiments with black magic, he had cursed himself. He attempted to flee the island as to not be attached to the curse, but this didn't work. In the afterlife, he was bound to the land and his old foundry. Those who have visited the island have seen a black figure with glowing red eyes. He is often seen at the stroke of midnight. When he is near, you can feel the chill in your bones. You know that you're in the presence of darkness just by being on the island during his hour. His laboratory still stands today, and some have tried to find his old lab to learn all the dark magic and secrets that he tried to hide. It is said a fire nearly destroyed the building. The police believe this to be man-made, and it's speculated he was trying to destroy the demons and spirits he had accidentally been working with in the lab. He couldn't escape the curse, and if you don't want to meet the same fate, I would avoid visiting this building. And finally, in at number 1 we have the Woldneil Hostert School. The school was first built in 1913 and then closed in 1937 when it was then used by the National Socialism Party. They wanted to use the building as part of their euthanasia program. They wanted to make their bloodlines pure and strong, and they had the idea to use the building to house anyone who was not seen as genetically healthy. All those with hereditary illnesses or who were severely mentally and physically handicapped were classified as lives unworthy of life. They would invite the people they deemed to fall into this category to live in the facility before they would eliminate them. According to data collected, more than 260,000 people fell victim to their war against sick. This was just one of many of these facilities run around Germany. With all of the horrible acts committed here, it is no surprise that it is haunted with the lost souls. The people lost here were taken suddenly, and their spirits remain unable to pass on. Some people who have visited reporting hearing blood-curdling cries coming up the walls in every direction. Others have seen shadows darting from room to room as though they are watching those who walk there. Other ghosts have been seen looking through the windows or sitting inside the rooms late at night. They don't seem to have bad intentions, but they seem to be distraught, which can be equally as dangerous if you were to stumble across them unknowingly. Some even claim to see children who have disappeared as soon as they were noticed. The stories from those who have visited are terrifying and chilling to hear. It is enough to warn anyone away from attempting to visit the old school. In at number 5 we have Stockus Beach. The Stockus Beach is a popular sightseeing spot for locals and tourists to see and take pictures of the northern lights, but many people think that this beach is extremely haunted. It is located in the southeast coast of Iceland and has a stunning view with a massive mountain and beautiful black sand. A photographer, Eric Bennett, had an experience where he had stayed on the beach all night to wait for the lights to take pictures. He and his friend Matt were the only people there as the sun went down and the ocean tide came up and washed away all the footprints from the people during the day. They go to the car for a nap, and at 11 PM they wake up and find the northern lights shining throughout the sky. They get out their tripods and cameras and start shooting. They were the only 2 people on the beach. When they looked down, they saw mysterious footprints leading up to their tripod, and then they just stopped. They were big, defined, wet footprints. They suddenly turned on their headlamps and no other footprints of humans were found in sight. Eric showed the photos he had taken of the footprints to Matt, and he freaked out, saying he had a strange feeling the entire night and wasn't able to nap because he felt like someone was standing outside of the car watching them. The 2 men stayed and tried to take more photos, but they started hearing voices being carried around the beach by the wind. A dark and heavy feeling was weighing on them, so they left immediately, and as they drove away, the heavy feeling started going away. Eric had told his story to a fellow traveller, and the man had just finished a documentary about the haunted beach, and that there have been many sightings by locals and tourists of a giant hairy man walking out of the ocean at night. This beach is also home to many shipwrecks over time, and many believe that the souls that have passed away from these wrecks still roam the beach to this day. In at number 4 we have Hivitvartan Lake. Hivitvartan Lake, otherwise known as White River Lake, is located in the highland on the Kojola Highland. Many icebergs surround the area, and because of the glacial rivers, the lake always looks a bit milky, which contributes to the nickname. One of the many huts or travel lodges in the highlands that locals and tourists can stay in while in Iceland. There is one hut in particular that is rumoured to be haunted, and it's the mountain hut at Hitvarnes, nearby the lake. It's rumoured to be one of the most haunted places in Iceland. The hut was built by the Icelandic Touring Association in 1930, and there are many paranormal stories surrounding this hut since its inception. Many claim to see the ghost of a young lady dressed in grey in the hut. Many locals and guests claim to experience disturbances by the spirit, and some have claimed to have seen her in one of the windows from outside when arriving late at night, and then when entering the hut it was empty. A particular bed in the hut is believed to be unsafe and almost impossible to sleep in. Many people who have tried to sleep in the bed claim that they have been kicked out of the bed by force during the night, and when they were woken up no one was around. It's said that this is a ghost of a young woman and it's her bed and she won't allow anyone to sleep in it, hence why people are forced out of the bed while sleeping. Many travelling in Iceland avoid staying in this hut, but many paranormal investigators and ghost lovers visit to try and come in contact with the woman.
Number 3 on this list is Salotarjani Cemetery. Cemeteries are supposed to be peaceful places where the dead can pass, but sometimes that doesn't happen and they end up like this one, deeply haunted. Orbits writes, on the far outskirts of Budapest lies a forgotten cemetery straight out of a horror movie. The tall, imposing stone gates now face an outline set on train tracks with an eerie silence only broken a few times an hour by a passing train. A knock on the gates results in 2 large guard dogs rushing to the iron bars, jaws slapping as they attempt to ward off any unwelcome visitors. Inside the giant walls of the once magnificent cemetery are rows of impressive tombs of certainly important people of their time. This cemetery is the oldest Jewish burial ground on the pest side of the city, but fell into ruins after most of the Jewish population was forced out of the area during World War II. After a short stint as a Soviet military hangout, the forest is slowly trying to take back the land, gnawing around the massive stone and marble burial chambers. Over the years, many of the tombs have been opened and looted of anything of value. The disturbed and derelict cemetery is sure to have at least a few angered spirits still hanging around, making it a place that you may not want to visit after sunset. Angered spirits is right, guys. There are countless stories of people getting literally attacked by unknown entities that they can't defend themselves against. I imagine that these are the spirits of the individuals whose graves were robbed. That is just such a blatant act of darkness that it's bound to wake up the spirits of the dead and anger them. I'm also under the impression that some people were killed here during World War II, which most likely only adds to the haunting. The guard dogs are there for a reason, and in this case, it might actually be for our own safety. Number 2 on this list is the town of Veszprém. This town is also known as the Soviet Ghost Town. Atlas Obscura says, the forest is slowly eating the crumbling buildings within the ghost town. Once a bustling Soviet military base, it now looks like an eerie post-apocalyptic wasteland. This was mainly built in the 1960s to house Soviet soldiers. It functioned like a tiny town for the soldiers and their families, forming an isolated, self-sustaining community. It had many fixtures you'd expect to see in any civilian town, like schools, a movie theater, pubs, and restaurants, though most of the base was dominated by large blocks of barracks. After the Soviet Union fell in the late 1980s, many of the residents left the base. The Hungarian Defense Forces were gradually laid off, and the nearby War Helicopter Regiment became defunct in 2004. Now the base's only visitors are curious urban explorers and the occasional airsoft players who dart and duck around many of the neglected buildings. It didn't take long for the abandoned town to begin looking like a scene from an end-of-the-world action thriller. The buildings have begun to fade and fall. Greenery creeps over the unused streets and climbs the walls of the derelict structures. Nature is reclaiming the site from civilization, slowly clutching it within its grasp. So to begin, the town is already pretty freaking creepy. However, there's been rumors of an entity that lives here as well. In the time since it's been abandoned, people believe that a beast or monster has taken up residence here. The few people who have gone here have reported the feeling of being stalked, as if something similar to a predator lives here now and it's out to get them. Talks of a potential werewolf have been thrown out there as well, which I can honestly believe. Whatever this creature is, it's dangerous. Stay away from this town at all costs. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Istvn train yard. This is an abandoned trade yard where old cars rot away. Some of these cars rotting here, though, have seen their fair share of horrors. Atlas Obscura says, more than 100 locomotives and train cars rot away, some in deteriorating depots, others out in the field. Among these are some very rare train engines and a few cars that are said to have transported prisoners to Auschwitz during the Holocaust. Built at the beginning of the 20th century as a repair yard for the National Railway, only a few southern parts of the train yard are still in use, while most of it is abandoned. 2 large depots, a few smaller sheds, and open-air areas are scattered with locomotives and rail cars, some of them very ancient, others more recent, from Hungary's time as part of the Soviet regime. Some of the trains were brought here to be repaired and then were to be put to the Budapest Railway Museum, but never made it to the display and were instead left behind in the train yard. Now, one big reason that they never made it is because these cars are haunted, guys. The literal car that went to Auschwitz. Just think how many horrors that tiny box has seen. The souls of those who were forced in there still linger, and this train yard is haunted because of it. I feel for these souls too. They never asked for this, and now they've just been forgotten by the world. Hopefully, one day, they can find rest.
Number 5 on this list is Kini Castle. Kini Castle was a castle built in the 13th century in south-central Poland. This castle was host to many battles over the years until it ultimately fell in the 18th century. Many Polish kings lived in this castle, at least at one point of their reign, and at one point it was rather marvelous. Now it's a ruin of its former self and still haunted by a ghost of a past royal. Queen Bona Sforza lived a very interesting and lavish lifestyle for someone in the 1500s. She was initially born in Milan to a very wealthy and powerful Italian family. This family's influence was vast, and many powerful people wanted to wed Bona Sforza. Eventually, Polish King Sigismund, nicknamed the Old, was the selected suitor, and the pair got married. This made Bona Sforza Queen Bona Sforza of Poland. It's the ghost of this Polish queen that is said to haunt the castle walls to this day, though. A lady in white that floats through the walls of the ruined castle searching for something. Or at least that's what people have reported when they've seen her. They say that her ghost looks as if she's trying to find something that she lost. That her ghost looks extremely troubled and distraught. This all stems back to the legend of what happened when she was alive. The manner of her death is hazy at best, but whilst she was living, it's believed that Queen Bona Sforza hid a bundle of treasure somewhere around this castle. Many people think it was beneath the river near the castle, whilst others believe it's underneath the castle itself. Either way, now her soul continually wanders the grounds searching for this treasure, as if finding it will release her from this purgatory state. From the reports that I read, many people don't think that she is dangerous, which is a good thing, but they have noted feeling very sad around this castle. Some people have said that after visiting said castle, it felt as if a cloud of depression hung over them for several months after the fact. Potentially the same feeling the soul of Queen Bona Sforza has all the time. Number 4 on this list is the Skull Chapel of Kazermna. This is one of the creepiest spots in Europe, if you ask me. This is a Polish church that was built in 1776 to 1804 by Father Wacław Tomaziak. When he first started building this church, he got hit with a pretty unsettling surprise. Digging into the ground, he discovered bones, and then more bones, and then more bones after that. Thousands of dead remains littered the area right underneath his feet where his church was being built. This didn't stop him though. In fact, it only inspired him. He got the local undertaker, and then they collectively worked on digging up every single remain that they could find. They learned that these dead bodies were from a mass grave that was put there during the 30 Years' War, which happened over a century prior. After cleaning off all of the dead skulls and bones, the father took them and hung them all throughout his church. Now you have this incredibly eerie room with over 3,000 skulls and bones hanging down from the walls. Obviously, a location like this has sparked some rumors of a haunting over the past years. People believe that the spirits of the dead soldiers were angered that their grave was disturbed, and now their spirits haunt the church. Reports of incredible uneasiness is said to be felt by most people that enter this space and stay there for a while. Honestly though, I'm not sure if this is indicative of a haunting in this case. Pretty sure anyone would feel uneasy if they were standing in the middle of 3,000 dead skulls that were all staring down at them.
In at number 3 we have Holovalagora Cemetery. There are many cemeteries around the world and many of them are haunted, and that's also the case for the Holovalagora Cemetery. This cemetery is one of the most famous in Iceland and is often called the Old Churchyard. Opened in 1838 in Reykjavik and is the largest 19th century cemetery in all of Iceland, and was replacing a previous burial ground used since the Viking times. The city placed the graveyard on a small hill a couple of blocks off the city's central pong. Some of Iceland's most famous people are buried here, including John Sigurðsson, the father of Icelandic independence, Johannes Sveinsson Kjarval, Iceland's most famous painter, and Ingeborg Bjarnason, the first woman member of parliament. The graveyard also houses many of the victims of the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic and a monument to French sailors who were lost at sea. In a country with minimal trees, the cemetery is covered. It's practically a forest, which makes this resting ground that much more eerie. The graves are surrounded by willow, spruce, birch, and rowan trees. Many come to pay respects to the legendary Icelandic buried here, but many believe the old Vikings previously buried here along with the influenza victims are the ones who haunt the living to this day. A videographer from New Zealand that films his travels visited Iceland and went to the cemetery during the night, and he claims to have caught orbs on camera that were floating in and around the gravestones. He had created an entire video of this finding, and he was convinced that there is paranormal activity at this cemetery, and he was thoroughly spooked during his time there. Many paranormal investigators and ghost hunters come to try and interact with these spirits. Locals and tourists who have visited the cemetery have seen spirits and have felt that they are being watched. Many believe the spirits often haunt the grounds at night time, so if you're planning a trip to Iceland, I would avoid the cemetery, especially after the sun goes down. In at number 2, we have the Priest's Stone. Many people in Iceland and in the surrounding areas believe in and have many tales of elves, trolls, and fairy people. One of the most famous tales is about Haunted Rock, where a kind and loving priest spirit haunts and terrorizes his love even after death, and he still haunts the rock and the people who visit it. The story has been told for ages and are very well known among the people of Iceland. It took place in Hogardula, not far away from a town of Akureyri. The story has slightly changed over time, but it's believed that it started on a stormy night before Christmas, when a priest's apprentice rode quite a distance to meet the woman he was in love with. On the way there, the weather was rough, and he drowned while crossing a raging river, and only his horse survived. His love, not knowing of his death, gets a visit the next evening. In the darkness, she believed that it was the priest's apprentice and goes out with him on his horse. During the ride, the man's hat falls off, revealing it was a skeleton. She gains no peace from this ghost, who wants her to join him in death. She goes to a sorcerer for help, and he achieves putting the ghost to rest, but it was on unholy ground, right outside the graveyard at the country church at Mykra. The cursed stone is still believed to hold the lovesick priest's apprentice captive to this day, and the stone is still very visible. Due to this famous tale, many tourists and locals come to see the cursed rock, hoping to come in contact with the priest's apprentice's ghost. In at number 1, we have Hooy House. The most haunted place in all of Iceland is the Hooy House. It is believed by locals and tourists to be the most haunted place. This home is located in the city of Reykjavik. It was built back in 1909 and sits on the waterfront just off Borgartun. This home was inspired by Nordic Art Nouveau and was constructed in Norway and shipped to Iceland. The Hooy home has a haunting history. It was initially built for the French consul Jean-Paul Boulogne in Iceland. Then it was sold to a judge and a poet in Einar Benediktsson, who claimed it was haunted by the ghost of a young woman often nicknamed the White Lady. The ghost is that of Solberg Jonsdottir, who had poisoned herself after Einar's verdict on a notorious case. At the home, she would often appear at the night and haunt him, and the owners of the home claimed to hear strange noises and see the figure of a woman in the early hours of the morning. Other accounts believe that she had drowned, or that the home was built on Viking burial site where the souls of the Vikings still roam the house and the land around it. This home is best known for in 1986 when former US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, where they discussed negotiations on military control and disarmament. The Hooy has come to represent Iceland's diplomacy and the start of the demise of the Cold War. In 2015, a sculpture of Einar was made and is displayed outside the home. It has also housed many other famous figures over the years, including Queen Elizabeth, Winston Churchill, and Marlene Dietrich. Nowadays, the Hooy is owned by the city of Reykjavik and is currently used for official receptions and meetings, and is not open to the public, but many locals and tourists flock to explore the home from the outside, hoping to come in contact with the ghost of Solberg.
Number 5 on this list is the Devil's Precipice. The Devil's Precipice is located in the village of Cosmonel and is definitely one of the cooler entries on this list in my opinion. The Devil's Precipice is basically one big dangerous treasure hunt. The legend says that bandits hid some very valuable treasure here hundreds of years ago after they pulled off a massive heist. They didn't just leave it here though, but they actually cursed the treasure in the area around it so that the only people who could ever get it
would be them. This was many years ago, and since then this curse has made it impossible for those who are hunting this treasure to ever actually find it. It's said that this area can be haunted by a bunch of different things, and your experience searching for this treasure differs from person to person. It's not uncommon though for those seeking this treasure to completely lose their minds. Apparently these people won't even be able to fully describe their experience after they finished, but their brains will just have gone to complete mush and they're just a shell of their former selves. Some people are lucky enough to not get this fate, but instead come face to face with some bull-like demons. The body of a human with the head of a bull. These creatures are said to guard the treasure and will stop at nothing to keep you from taking it. The luckiest people don't need to deal with either of these things though, and instead just get wildly confused and lost. When someone is approaching the treasure, it's said that a spell will be cast on them. They'll blink and then they'll find themselves many kilometers away from where they previously were. Their bodies just go into this trance-like state and they completely lose all sense of direction, just walking aimlessly through the woods. Oftentimes when they're found, they're completely covered in scratch marks and have no idea what happened to them. The lure of buried treasure is appealing, but it's clear that this is a treasure that just simply doesn't want to be found, and it's gonna do anything to stop you from getting it. Number 4 on this list is the Chaga Monastery. Built in 1780, this monastery is located outside the capital city of Romania. Even though Romanians back in the day spent a long time building this place, it was never really used for anything. It was never properly blessed or consecrated, and because of that, it's been host to a series of unfortunate events. It is now the site of paranormal activity. Only 10 years after it was built, Turkish troops came in and raided it. During their raid, they set a fire in this building and everything burned, but the building still stood. Then several years later, the building and those who were in it got hit with a massive outbreak of the plague, and if that wasn't bad enough, the building was also hit later with a massive earthquake which caused the bell tower to collapse and the bell was drawn away by a nearby river. The fact that there's any building left standing at all is actually kind of a marvel, but due to its history, locals say it's super haunted. People warn you of going to this place because if you do, it's said that you'll get hit with some horrible luck. There have also been sightings of very sickly individuals, assumingly victims of the plague outbreak that happened many years ago. The most common paranormal experience at this place though is the ringing of the bell. The same bell that fell off so many years ago will ring out when there's a full moon in the sky. Honestly, the ringing of a bell isn't too bad and would actually be pretty cool to experience if it was a full moon, but if you do decide to go, then I recommend keeping your distance. You don't want to get a slew of bad luck following you around just so you could hear this one ghost bell. Number 3 on this list is Mount Sleza. Mount Sleza is a Polish mountain in the Sudeten Foreland, southern Poland. This mountain has an incredible amount of lore and history connected to it. There's a great article detailing the power connected to this mountain called Psychic Haunting Mount Sleza, written by a man named Nathan, and I'm going to quote his article now. The truth is that Sleza is an ancient ritual site of local Celtic culture later on used by other pagan societies before Christianity came. Over hundreds of years, the place filled with positive spiritual energies, and for this day, these energies can be sensed. It's also a haunted place, but not by some ghosts and apparitions, but by real spirits, and I'm talking about spirits that were never human. Some people call these entities the spirits of nature. In any case, these are the spirits of the mountain. They protect it and they help people in their spiritual pursuits. As spirits of this sort, they can be very helpful, but also very dangerous if you fail to show them proper respect. Unfortunately, a lot of tourists fail to show this kind of respect by leaving rubbish on tourist routes or even by sitting on cult sculptures. Don't do this no matter what kind of sacred place you're visiting. You wouldn't sit down on a crucifix if you're Christian, would you? So that's the history of this mountain and how it's come to be haunted by some ancient spirits. Now the good thing about this mountain is if you ever do decide to go, you don't need to be haunted. If you walk in and you show these ancient spirits respect, then you may even receive a good vision from them. This place will basically give you back what you put into it, so if you do decide to go, then approach it seriously and you should be fine. Number 2 on this list is Chaga Castle. This is another Polish castle that was built in the 13th century, but this one is far more haunted than the last. We currently don't know exactly what the initial castle would have looked like because in 1909 it was rebuilt to resemble the style of the 18th century. It's a very beautiful castle and located right next to a river with incredible scenery. This castle is absolutely riddled with ghosts though. The first ghosts to mention, and the ones that you would interact with first if you were to visit this castle, is a group of dead that lie at the bottom of the river. Back in 1719, as a funeral was taking place, people were walking the casket over the castle bridge.
That bridge collapsed into the river and several of the people who fell in drowned. It's been reported by many people going to this castle that the screams of those who drowned can still be heard as you walk over said bridge. The scariest part is that their screams aren't the loudest ones there. A woman's cries for help are the ones that can be heard the most when passing over this bridge, and it's believed that those cries belong to Joachim von Nitz's wife. Joachim was one of the owners of this castle during its history, and what he's remembered for at this location is rather brutal. His wife had an affair and got pregnant with another man's child. Joachim felt exceptionally betrayed and hurt, so he responded by drowning his wife in that river. This wasn't enough for him though, because he actually allowed her to give birth, and then as she watched, he took her newborn child and bricked it up in the chimney. This is why when people pass by the chimney in this castle, the screaming of a newborn can be heard ringing throughout. Believe it or not though, there's still another ghost that haunts this place. This woman's name was Gertrude, and she lived at this place before any of the other ghosts did. One evening she got in a heated argument with her brother. This sparked her inevitable betrayal, where she set an army upon this castle. They didn't conquer the castle though, and she was found out. Her brother held nothing back and beheaded her for her actions, whilst also cursing her in the process. Now her spirit is cursed to live in this castle forever. For anybody that's counting, that makes 4 separate ghosts that live at this castle. Certainly not a spot that I would recommend visiting. Number 1 on this list is the Rice Complex. The Rice Complex is a massive underground city with a connection of tunnels that is located inside the Owl Mountains. This was a project that the Germans started in World War II in 1943. Now, the exact purpose behind this project is currently unknown. However, most assume that it was going to act as a secret German military defense base. It was never fully finished, with about only half of the project getting constructed. But if it ever was fully constructed, then capturing it would have been extremely difficult, considering it would have been impossible to bomb as it's located in a mountain, and physically storming up said mountain to take it would have proven even more challenging. Even though it's only half finished, there was still a massive amount of infrastructural work done on this project. It's estimated that 257,000 cubic meters of reinforced concrete was brought into these tunnels during the 2 years it was under construction. It's also believed that some of the tunnels and pathways haven't even been discovered yet. This is partly because some of the tunnels have flooded over the years, but frankly, could be a blessing in disguise, as they're said to be very haunted. Now, I don't think I need to describe in detail some of the brutalities that the Germans committed during World War II. We're all aware of how abhorrent some of those actions were. The construction of this project, it was no exception. Many of the prisoners who were forced to work on this complex were either killed or died from being overworked. Lots of people lost their lives far too soon, and it's really sad to think about. The people who have been in these tunnels have said that all of that brutality left its mark. Some of the souls of those who died here still haunt it to this day. People have reported seeing ghostly apparitions wandering through the tunnels, and the sounds of hard labor reverberating throughout. I'm not actually even sure if you can visit this place, but I wouldn't recommend going even if you could.
In at number 5 we have Ghost Castle. In the town of Bios in Serbia, on the slopes of Fruška Mountains, rests an abandoned building, in ruins and long forgotten. Known originally as the Spitzer Castle, it was once one of the most beautiful sights in all of Serbia, with glass gardens, peacocks and deer, somewhere you would only hear about in a fairy tale. It was built in the late 19th century by Edward Eddie Spitzer, who was the co-owner of the Biasin cement factory. Spitzer hired the famous architect Imre Stindl, best known for his work on the Hungarian Parliament building in Budapest. The architectural styles of Spitzer Castle include elements of Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque and Romanesque art. In 1889 the mansion had been finished and the Spitzer family moved into the castle and lived there until World War II, then leaving in 1941 and moving to Germany. After the war, the ownership of the castle went to the state, and then at various points in time it hosted a school, library, the first Biasin radio station and a restaurant, but as time went on the building was slowly deteriorating. It was also used as a film set for many movies, including the 1970 American war film Kelly's Heroes starring Clint Eastwood. Today the castle is deserted, surrounded by wires, without door or windows and crumbling rooftops. The locals had nicknamed the building as the Ghost House due to many people hearing, seeing and coming into contact with paranormal entities. On more than one account, people hear footsteps and screams coming from one of the bedrooms. This This creepy, decaying building is scary enough, but many dark tourism enthusiasts come here to see if they too can come into contact with any ghosts and haunted beings. There is a theory from the locals that a boy was roaming the home with his friends, but had gone off on his own and never returned. The boy's friends said they heard screams, and when they had run over to the area, it was coming from nothing. They had searched in and around the building, but the boy was never found, and to this day people still hear his screams. This is one place you should never visit because you may never come back. Coming in at number 4, we have Devil's Town. Devoljaveros, which translates to English as Devil's Town, is a very unusual rock formation said to be created by soul erosion. These peculiar rock towers are located between the Devil's Gully and Hell's Gully near the town of Kuršumlija in southern Serbia. Located on Mount Radin are more than 200 stone formations, 2 to 15 meters high and up to 3 meters wide, with strange stone caps. This particular place is a huge tourist destination, not only because of its beautiful and unique looking rock towers, but also because of the legend surrounding this eerie place. Locals believe that these weird looking rock formations are actually petrified remains of a cursed wedding party. Apparently these poor people drank from a nearby spring, which attracted the devil himself, who tried to cloud their minds and force a brother and sister into marriage. Once the word got to a local fairy, she decided to interfere and turn them all into stone. The locals still insist that the area is haunted by the devil and refuse to spend a night there. If you're brave enough to go to this cursed place, all I have to say is don't overstay your welcome. Devil's Town and their odd looking rock towers continue to be a very rare natural phenomenon, and was actually a nominee in the new 7 Wonders of Nature campaign. Definitely one of the most visited places in Serbia, whether it's because its beauty or its haunted past. It's unknown its true origins, but it's definitely a very creepy place. If you're still willing to travel and see this place, maybe just leave before the sun sets, just in case.
Number 3 on this list is Gamana. Gamana is currently an abandoned Romanian village that isn't doing too hot right now. Everything about this town was nice and quaint until in 1978 when its world got turned upside down. Communist ruler at the time, Nicolae Ceausescu, decided that he wanted to exploit a massive reserve for copper that was close to the village. This copper mine produced incredible amounts of copper and was extremely profitable, but it was at the expense of these villagers. Mining copper creates a lot of waste that you can't just put anywhere. Well, the dictator decided that the perfect spot was the village of Gamana. All the local villagers were ousted from their homes and sent over 100 kilometers away and given little compensation for their houses and their trouble. Then their homes and their village was swallowed up by a sea of toxic waste that's literally still here to this day. Nowadays you can only see the top of the church poking its head out of this dangerous lake of poison. Before the villagers left, it said that they put a curse on this land. Those with ill intentions will feel the effects of despair and loneliness forever. They'll feel like an outcast from their homes, from society, and from their family and friends. It said that they wanted to make those who came to this place with ill intentions feel how they felt when they had to leave their homes and go to a completely new place with no warning. Make them feel like they don't belong and they're a burden on those around them. This feeling is echoed by those who visited this place, and locals say that if you do want to see this in person, to make sure that your intentions are nothing but kind and gentle. Factor in a whole other reason why you shouldn't go to this place, but it's literally because it's a giant lake of toxic waste, and I'm just guessing here, but I imagine that that's not ideal to be breathing in. Number 2 on this list is Dracula's Castle. This wouldn't be a complete list if I didn't bring up Romania's most famous fictional character and his residence. The castle, also known as Bran Castle, is located in Transylvania, which is also in Romania. It shares a shocking resemblance to Dracula's castle in Bram Stoker's classic novel. Dracula, being a vampire, would walk around his castle walls by himself, occasionally coming out at nighttime to feast on human victims or turn them into other vampires. The character of Dracula is often associated with Vlad the Impaler, and even though Vlad didn't spend too much of his time at this castle, it's believed that this castle is the inspiration for Dracula's home. Now, I should note that this castle probably isn't actually haunted. Unlike the other entries on this list, this castle isn't known for having horrible atrocities take place inside its walls. The horrible tragedies that occurred all took place within someone's mind, and then that person wrote them on a page for all of us to envision. Therefore, in all honesty, I'm kind of breaking the rules a little bit with this entry because I do think that you should go and visit Dracula's castle. There aren't actual ghosts there, so you're not risking any harm befalling you, and you get to literally walk through the walls imagining Dracula doing the same thing. They have a restaurant by this castle, they have tons of events there, and they even throw the occasional party. On Halloween, you can go there for a special event and celebrate in Dracula's literal castle. I actually don't think I can come up with with a cooler place to celebrate Halloween on Earth than in Dracula's castle, but if you guys can, then comment it down below. However, I don't know what it's gonna take to beat out Dracula's literal home. So, number 1 on this list is Corvina Castle. Corvina Castle, even though it wasn't written as Dracula's castle, honestly should have been. This is a castle in Romania that has seen its fair share of horrors and it's deeply haunted because of it. This castle has had tons of horror stories over the years. One of them says that Vlad the Impaler was actually held captive here for 7 years in the dungeons, that he lived off of rats and he impaled them after he'd eaten them, that his deep desire for blood and death rose as he was trapped between these walls. Another legend talks of 3 Turkish prisoners who were promised freedom if they dug a 100-foot deep well. The prisoners did this and it took them over 15 years to accomplish the project, but when they were finished, were mercilessly thrown back into their cells and tortured. This castle even has a bear pit in the dungeons. It's said that those who were sentenced to death would be taken and thrown into this bear pit with a hungry bear inside and mauled to death by the animal. Horrific torture devices have been found in this castle and other dark sadistic things that have made it one of the most haunted spots in all of Romania. Now, due to all this violence, there are several curses and hauntings that hang over this place. The first one is the well. Locals warn to never drink from that well, and also if you visit this castle, throw a coin down there and say a prayer. The 3 Turkish prisoners who dug it cursed it before they died and made it so that bad things will come to those who drink the water. The second is a monk. There was a monk who was staying at this castle who was caught eavesdropping on a conversation between 2 people. He was taken outside and bricked until he died. His spirit still roams around the halls of this building to this day, with some people reportedly having conversations with him before. Several other people have seen ghostly apparitions of those who look to be dead, and some have even seen full scenes of people being brutally tortured. Dread, despair, depression, these are all commonly reported feelings from visitors of this castle. Certainly not a spot that I recommend going if you do find yourself in Romania.
Number 5 on this list is Cassa Laro. This is a beautiful casa in Tenor life, and there is a ghost that haunts it consistently. Idealista says the origins of this scary story are related to the old house of the Lacaro family, which is located in Cala din San Augustin and dates back to the late 16th century. Catalina lived in this building. Many believe that this girl was the daughter of Antonio Lacaro and that she was forced to marry an elderly man, and for this reason the young woman decided to take her own life by throwing herself into a well at the back of the house, an area which is now closed with a wall. Legend has it that Catalina's body is buried in one of the rooms within the house and haunts the property to this day. This is due to the fact that because she took her own life, the church denied giving her a Christian burial in a cemetery. This lack of a proper burial is probably leading to the fact that her ghost can't rest. As we've seen before on this channel countless times, people who get cast away like that, regardless of their circumstances, their spirit often clings to the living. I doubt that they can help this in any way, it's just kind of the way things like this operate. It also doesn't help getting your body literally stuffed into the walls of your building, and also taking your own life usually isn't the best either. Regardless of why this place is haunted though, it definitely is. The disembodied voice of this woman is heard frequently, and it often manifests itself in this shrieking scream cry that's very unsettling for all of those who listen. Some have seen her apparition appear before them, but apparently this is a pretty rare occurrence. Number 4 on this list is the Madrid Sanatorium. As with most countries, there is a sanatorium that makes the list as being one of the most haunted. It just so happens to be one of the locations that sees the most tragedies in the world, and therefore often has a clumping of dark spirits and energy. Idealista says this sanatorium in the region of Madrid was built in 1941 to treat some of the most serious diseases that were plaguing the civilian population back then. These diseases were tuberculosis, leprosy, polio, fibrosis, and lung cancer. It was eventually converted into a psychiatric hospital, and in 1995, it closed its doors once and for all. Until not long ago, it was possible to go inside and visitors could find the records and personal objects of former patients. Those who have been there speak of mysterious presences in the corridors, electrical devices that strangely stop working for no reason, and doors that suddenly close violently. Many people also claim to have seen lights in the immensity of plants that resemble lanterns walking around. I mean, it really is no wonder why this place is haunted, guys. We went from a sanatorium to a psychiatric hospital, and it's clear that both places saw a lot of death in their time. It should also be noted that psychiatric hospitals back in the day were not nearly as good as they are now. People were very often mistreated at these places, and it's not common to see those spirits linger on. There truly is no reason for you to be traveling to this place other than to test your luck with the ghosts, something that I really don't recommend doing.
Coming in at number 3, we have the Skull Tower. This stone structure is located in Nis, Serbia, and almost 1,000 human skulls are embedded in the walls. Constructed by the Ottoman Empire in 1809 following the Battle of Zagar during the First Serbian Uprising. During the battle, Serbian rebels under the command of Stephen Sindelik were surrounded by the Ottomans on Siga Hill near Nis. Knowing that he and his fighters would be killed if they were captured, Stephen detonated a powder magazine within the rebel entrenchment, killing not only himself but also his fighters and the Ottoman soldiers. After this massacre, the governor of the Rumelia Eyalet, Hushid Pasha, ordered that a tower be made from the skulls of the fallen. The tower is 15 feet high and consisted of 952 skulls embedded on 4 sides in 14 rows. So many lives were lost at the Skull Tower, and the history and skulls displayed are proof of that. And many believe that these lost souls still roam the area and is considered to be a very haunted attraction in Siberia. In 1861, Mithat Pasha, the last Ottoman governor of Nis, ordered that the Skull Tower be dismantled, but that did not happen. It was eventually restored and the chapel was renovated in 1937. In 1948, Skull Tower and the chapel enclosing it were declared cultural monuments of exceptional importance and came under protection of the Socialist Republic of Serbia, and further renovation of the chapel occurred in 1989. Many Serbians see this display as a symbol of the country's struggle for independence. As of this year, only 58 skulls remain in the tower walls, and Sindelik's skull is said to be featured in an enclosed glass container next to the structure. The Skull Tower is a very popular tourist attraction, visited by 30,000 to 50,000 people annually to see this eerie and creepy display. Coming in at number 2, we have Mount Ratanj. This is a mountain located in eastern Serbia between the towns of Bolijevec and Soka Banja, and is one of the highest peaks in Serbia and is another huge phenomenon. Many stories have emerged from onlookers and tourists that go to Ratanj. Stories about unusual flying objects which circle around the peak, fiery spheres, aliens and voices in unknown languages have been some of many things people experience here. This mountain is also talked about by many due to its beauty, size and perfect geometrical shape resembling a pyramid. Ratanj actually has the same angle of inclination as the Pyramid of the Moon in Mexico, and same angles as the Pyramid of Cheops, and many believe that this is not coincidence. The mystery surrounding Ratanj is still the reason for many scientists' arguments. Some say the mountain is actually an ancient pyramid, a natural wonder, the work of a higher power of even aliens. Another local legend explains that the castle of a wizard was located on Ratanj Mountain, where he held his treasure, but the castle had eventually disappeared within the mountain, trapping the wealthy sorcerer inside with his treasures, making this a very popular location for treasure hunters in search for lost gold and gems. So many questions loom over Mount Ratanj and has created a whirlwind of theories and tourists to come and try and experience the many things rumored to happen here. Others come to Ratanj for the rare healing herbs that grow in the mountains, and it emits a type of energy which is beneficial to human health, but this is only a rumor. Everyone who has visited this mountain say they experience a mysterious energy. We may never know if this is positive or negative. And finally, in at number 1, we have Sava Savanovic's Mill. This is one of the most well-known places in Serbia for its ghost stories. This mill is located in the hill of the small village of Saroj in the west-central part of Serbia, 3 hours away from the town of Belgrade. The story is that Sava Savanic was a vampire and the first ever vampire that resided at this mill. According to one story, Sava was a wealthy cattle trader and he had fallen in love with a much younger girl who he had proposed to, but she had rejected him. Blinded by anger and jealousy, he decided to kill the girl. After the locals of Saroj found out, they beat Sava to death and buried him outside the local cemetery. But actually, Sava had risen and became a vampire and began drowning everyone who would come to grind grain in his mill. For years, the locals of Saroj lived in fear of the murderous vampire until they came together and stabbed him with a hawthorn skate, killing him forever. And legend says that a butterfly escaped from Sava's grave, which meant that Sava is still visiting the mill to this day. The citizens of the village tell many stories about the horror they have faced from this creature, and it's the most known horror story throughout all of Serbia. And in 1880, one of the most famous Serbian authors, Milovan Glisic, wrote the book 90 Years Later, rooting from the story of this famous vampire, and was in fact published 17 years before Bram Stoker's Dracula. And then in 1973, all of the stories of the vampire were turned into Serbia's first horror film, Butterfly. The old Sava mill was left abandoned for a long time until it was renovated by the local owner of the village cafeteria, and after all of these stories swirling, Sava has become a local legend, and tourists come from near and far to visit this mill. Many still believe that Sava to this day still haunts the mill, and it's considered one of the most haunted places in all of Serbia.
Kicking off at number 5, Theatre de la Ville. Not gonna lie, this one is equal parts morosely charming and also completely terrifying. The Theatre de la Ville, meaning the City Theatre, was opened on the 30th of October and has a rich history of misfortune and tragedy. Until the fall of Napoleon III in 1870, it was known as the Imperial Theatre and showcased the dignitary of Paris in all their theatrical glory. One of the more tragic tales surrounding the theatre is the story of the French romantic poet and public eccentric Gérald de Nerval, who is best known for his sordid travel diaries and his strange habit of roaming the streets of Paris with his pet lobster in hand. Tragically, Nerval committed a grisly suicide in a particular shady corner of a nearby narrow street, and in death it is said that his spectre haunts the theatre. Spectators claim to have seen his form pop up on stage in a ghostly ploy to distract the actors. Apparently he's lost his lobster though. Next up at number 4, Parc Montsouris. Parc Montsouris is a picturesque picnic park in the heart of Paris, an otherwise perfect landscape for tourists and locals alike to enjoy on a hot summer's day. Opened in 1863, Parc Montsouris is one of the largest green spaces in Paris, comprised of 4 others which were created by Napoleon III and his prefect of the Seine, Baron Haussmann. They were made to be enjoyed by the ever-growing Parisian population and still are to this very day. Strange then that the grim history of a nearby paranormal hotspot is regularly avoided, blending both historical fact and local legend. The name of the park's only tomb, the Rue de la Tombe Issoire, which hints at its most notorious legend, that is Essai de Montsouris, a brigand who terrorised Paris during the 9th century, looting and pillaging passing travellers of the green area. Eventually he was caught and his head was lopped clean off by William of Aquitaine, but it didn't stop his spirit from continuing his terrifying regime, being one of the most notorious spirits to have been sighted in modern day Paris, often appearing at the park's Palais du Bardo. It may sound like hocus pocus, but still, stranger still, in 1911 the Palais was controversially sold to the government, but mysteriously it burnt down before any work could commence on it. The work of Montsouris? Well, probably.
Number 3 on this list is Ochate. Ochate is actually an entire village, and it's said that the whole village is haunted. This village is abandoned now, and maybe a big reason for that is because of how haunted it is. Don Quixote says why this village started to empty at the end of the 19th century is still not entirely clear, but illness, unfortunate weather, and a murder all had a role to play. During this time there was sickness, especially the Spanish flu, which devastated the area, and rain and hail that destroyed crops in successive years during the 1920s caused people to go search for a better place to live. In 1930 there remained only 2 families, one being a family of 3 and the other a single elderly man. Because a crazy pastor that frequented the village threatened pretty much everyone, the Aranguiz family decided to move to a safer village nearby. The elderly man, Eusebio, wasn't far behind. Their fears were later realized when the crazed shepherd brutally killed a fellow shepherd in one of the abandoned houses in Ochate in 1936. All of this has obviously left its mark on this abandoned village, and now it's just a mess of ghostly and paranormal activity. A hotspot of spirits, demons, and beasts. In fact, and this is almost something else entirely, but there have been literal sightings of UFOs here before. That's a lot of stuff for one tiny village in Spain. I would recommend doing exactly how the locals did and avoiding this village at all costs. Number 2 on this list is the Thorax Hospital. The Thorax Hospital has definitely seen some horrible things over the years. The hospital, which is now abandoned and out of use, is located in Teresa. Back in its heyday, it was mainly used as a hospital for those sick with respiratory illnesses. All of the diseases varied, but if it had to do with your lungs, then it was likely that you ended up here. The hospital sadly boasted a very horrible statistic when it was operational. It seemed that an uncanny amount of individuals would take their own life if they got sent here. Many believe that due to the nature of the diseases that we're referring to, many people died a slow and painful death. This process often induced a sort of psychosis where the individuals would start to lose their mind a little bit before dying. Logical thought was very hard for these individuals to grasp, and even though it was a house of the sickly, it also turned into a house for the mad. This is why a lot of these individuals would take their own life. One of the biggest legends surrounding this spot is the jungle. Apparently, there is a garden in the middle of this hospital. Patients would go up to the 9th floor and they would either be thrown off or jump themselves to what was called the jungle down below, or the garden. Obviously, the 9-story fall was too much for their bodies to take and they would die. That's why people believe this garden to be the most haunted of all the spots in this hospital. A very dark and somber place in Spain that shouldn't be gone to. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Malaga tunnels. Malaga is a beautiful province in Spain by the water. It's a very popular tourist attraction spot that has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Underneath the fun in the sun, there are some deeply haunted tunnels though. Cycling Country writes, tied to a grisly chapter in Malaga's history when for 30 years a spate of young girls went missing in the area, some of their bodies were found near a river quite close to the Cortajo. Rumors soon abounded that underneath the building existed tunnels and torture chambers where these unfortunate women met their fate and with satanic rituals being performed. It also was a hospital and prison during the Bloody Civil War and quite possibly saw some executions and a lot of torment. The truth is, the tunnels did exist but have now been bricked up. The rest, well, you'll have to make up on your own mind whether this qualifies as one of the most haunted places in Spain. However, passing by this abandoned place sure is creepy. Disembodied voices, screams, lights, a sudden grip by a cold hand, and appearances in upstairs windows of people all add to the strangeness of this spot and have been witnessed by researchers in the paranormal fields. Unfortunately, this notoriety has caused a lot of damage due to thrill seekers trying to literally unearth the building's secrets. To add fire to these myths, in 2000 a film was made there using it as a backdrop. However, accidents, faulty sound, and battery problems plagued the production and it was never finished. For me, this is definitely one of the most haunted places in Spain. We're talking about torture chambers, satanic rituals, murder. This is a horrible place that has seen way too many tragedies and horrors to be anything but a haunted location. If you go to Malaga, stick to the fun and the sun and stay away from the tunnels and this haunted building. Going down there may just be the last thing that you do.
Number 5 on this list is the Hooy Market. Hooy Market is directly in the center of Vienna in Austria and is quite beautiful today. It has fancy supermarkets, boutique cafes, and high-profile stores for people to window shop and explore. Therefore, it's definitely a solid tourist attraction, but it may not be the best spot to go visit after you hear some of the things that happened here in the past. This market for over 500 years was where the state-sanctioned executions would take place. 500 years of people being killed off has resulted in thousands of deaths piling up over those said years. The manner to how these people were killed has changed and morphed over the years as well too. Most were hangings, but some were quarterings, which is a process where someone gets chopped up into tiny little pieces. Yeah, it's pretty graphic. Because of this, there have been many reports of hauntings in this market. Apparitions of people dressed in clothes dating back to the 14th century have shown themselves to people before. One report has someone detailing an instance that they turned a corner and swore they saw a dead corpse right in front of them. When they returned to the location with another person though, there was no sign of it at all. Other people have sworn that they've seen the ghost of an executioner here before, standing and waiting to hang someone. I honestly think that going to this market would be okay, but if I was to go, then I'd much rather go in the daytime. Probably not the spot you want to be walking around at nighttime with the ghosts of the executed. Number 4 on this list is Sitadel Castle.
6. I hope I pronounced that right, but I kinda highly doubt it. Either way, this is a building in Vienna that you shouldn't want to stay in at all. It all started when a woman tried to murder her husband. Not the best way to start a story, but here we are. The woman who lived in this building tried to poison her husband, but on the same night she meant to do it, actually died herself. Now, her spirit still resides at this place and haunts the people who stay here. Visitors of this building say that they'll see this ghostly apparition sitting in a wooden rocking chair and swaying back and forth, looking as eerie as ever. Apparently, this wooden chair also emits electromagnetic rays. Why it does this, or from where this legend came from, is currently unknown. This woman also isn't alone in her haunting of this place either. She was said to have a very pretty white cat, and this ghost kitty still sticks by her. The cat wanders the halls and can appear and disappear as it chooses. It's said that if someone looks at it, then mischief will find them and cause them major problems in their life. I should also note that this building isn't even that nice to begin with. Like, at least the market I could get a nice coffee or something, but best case scenario here is that I get bothered with rats, whereas the worst case scenario is I get murdered by some ghost woman. Not the spot that I recommend you stay at if you're heading to Vienna.
Coming in at number 3, the man in the black coat. And I just absolutely love this creepy tale because it reminds me of one of my favourite films of all time, Midnight in Paris. It's not scary in the slightest, but check it out if you haven't. Great film. Anyway, as the legend goes, on one particular warm evening in 1925, a man named Jean Romier was sat reading in the grounds of the Jardin du Luxembourg when a handsome man in a black coat approached him and, after conversation, invited him to a private concert at his nearby home. Romier followed the man to his apartment on the Rue de Vaugirard, where he was treated to a delightful evening of classical music and poetry. After enjoying his night, Romier left, and on his way home he went to light a cigarette, but realised that he'd left his lighter back at the apartment. He ran back upstairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door, but to no response. He knocked and knocked when a nearby neighbour came out of their apartment, annoyed at all the banging, and told Romier that no one lived there. It had been abandoned for at least 20 years, after the previous tenant, a talented musician, had tragically passed away. Since then, any local Parisian will tell you that if you linger late enough in the Jardin du Luxembourg, eventually a man in a black coat will invite you to his apartment for a private concert. Would you go? Me? Nah, I'm alright. Swinging in at number 2, we have the Jardin des Tuileries, which, while having a beautiful sounding name, is actually the scene of an incredibly bloody past and dark history. In the 16th century, the feared and nefarious Queen of France, Catherine de' Medici, had many enemies, conspirators who'd like nothing more than to bludgeon her in her sleep and remove her from the throne. Because of this, she employed the brute strength and bloody tactics of her henchman, Jean the Skinner, who rounded up her enemies and set about on a campaign to murder them all. He did exactly that, and he was very effective at it. So effective that Queen Catherine herself started to grow paranoid of him, because he knew so many of her secrets and political intrigues. Well, of course, she decided the only course of action was to execute Jean the Skinner outside her palace at Tuileries. Since then, the Red Man, also known as the Red Spectre, has been known to haunt the gardens in his blood-red attire. Marie Antoinette is said to have seen him just before losing her head, and it's commonly known that Napoleon consulted him during his rise as emperor to predict the outcome of forthcoming battles. That's pretty useful. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Les Catacombs. Because after all, it can be no other. There's no denying that the creepiest, eeriest, most paranormal place in Paris is the endless catacomb caverns that wind their way through the streets below. The catacombs of Paris are a myriad of underground ossuaries that allegedly hold the remains of more than 6 million people, which were created in an effort to eliminate the city's overflowing cemeteries. Whether you believe the tales that surround this haunted place or not, there's no denying that the Paris catacombs are an undeniable effigy to the dead and long lost souls of the City of Lights. Although there have been terrifying tales of entire tour groups going missing, people driven to insanity after being lost in the long dark of its winding tunnels, it's much simpler to see the real haunting that the catacombs possess, because the ghosts are in the very bones themselves, in the million memories that they represent, entire walls and tunnels built by the skeletal bones of the city's residents that have passed in and out of memory through a long, vibrant, rich, and often oftentimes bloody history. Paris has seen a lot in her time, and the tunnels, well, they'll keep on going.
Number 5 on this list is the Istvn Ghent haunted house. As is customary on our top haunted places lists, pretty much every country has one home that's deeply haunted, and this is Belgium's. Culture Trip says, near the Dutch border there was a haunted house so popular it attracted ghost hunters from all over Europe. Its fame became its downfall, and the owner had it demolished for safety reasons in 2011. After all, old crumbled walls and moldy wood are a health hazard if downtrodden by enthusiastic photographers and are sure to annoy the locals. Besides safety reasons, the owner had his sights set on selling the property with or without the house. According to local legends, a German soldier was electrocuted near the house during World War I and his ghost remains in the home. He was joined by 4 Canadian soldiers during World War II. Their tank hit a mine on the property. There are several unsettling tales about the house. Cell phones suddenly had no service, watches stopped ticking, doors slammed shut, and curious visitors captured strange mist on their cameras. Whatever the truth, we may never know. Since it was demolished, the haunted house of Istvn Ghent has turned into a legend. Now, even though the house is no longer there, the ghosts are still said to be in the area. The land here is deeply haunted with our respective World War I and World War II spirits. I find it really interesting that this home, or the ruins of it, aren't even haunted by a Belgian soldier at all, but literally by the ghosts of soldiers from different countries. I know that they died in unsettling and unnatural ways, and usually that's enough to leave a spiritual presence, but maybe the fact that it wasn't their home country added to this as well. Maybe it's harder to rest in peace when you're on foreign soil, when your family and loved ones are thousands of kilometers away. This is honestly just a theory that I was coming up with as I was writing this, so please comment down below if you think it might have some legs. Also, it should go without saying, but don't go visit this spot if you're ever in Belgium. Number 4 on this list is La Roche en Ardennes. We've already spoke about the haunted house. Well, another staple, especially for European countries, is the haunted castle. The castle La Roche en Ardennes is definitely one of Belgium's most haunted. Culture Trip writes, in the castle of La Roche en Ardennes, there used to live a nobleman with a very beautiful daughter named Berthe. He figured the best way to get a son-in-law was to organize a tournament and give the winner Berthe's hand in marriage. The story doesn't actually mention what Berthe thought of all this. The Count of Montague participated fiercely, despite already being engaged to another woman, Countess Alix de Selm. He won every game, but near the end of the tournament, a mysterious small knight in black entered the contest. Said knight killed the Count and took Berthe to the bridal chamber. The next morning, the couple were found dead on the cliffs underneath the bridal chamber's window. The mysterious knight turned out to be Countess Alix de Selm, who had made a pact with the devil so she could kill her cheating fiancé and his wife-to-be. Ever since then, the Countess ghost haunts the castle. Well, that story honestly screams Shakespeare play to me if I've ever heard one. We got drama, betrayal, murder, it literally has everything. And usually when it has all of those elements, a ghost is left behind to haunt what remains. This story is no different, and the residents of this castle since then, plus any visitors who have come here, are constantly terrorized by the ghost of this countess. Apparently she doesn't hide her presence at all, but makes herself very known. She'll attack visitors and has even been reported as possessing people. Most of the time people make a full recovery from these possessions, but there have been reports where the trauma never goes away. Anyone who's willing to make a pact with the devil is certainly someone I want to stay away from, and being in ghost form makes that even worse. Number 3 on this list is Malavenspitzbubenhaus. Now that is super hard to say, so for the remainder of this entry I'm going to refer to this as the Vienna prison. This place was put out of commission a long time ago, several hundred years ago in fact. There is a new building there now, but it's still haunted with the same ghosts that riddled this prison several hundred years ago. The prison was known for something truly horrible: torture. Apparently presumed criminals would be taken into the basement of this prison and brutally tortured in this spot. This torture was so horrible though that those that were kept here would sometimes take their own life prior to this treatment. The souls of those that were tortured and the souls of those that killed themselves are the ones that haunt this place to this day. Blood-curdling screams have been heard throughout this entire building. People have also reported feeling attacked by spirits here, like they're ripping at their own soul and tearing them apart. Just because you destroyed the initial building that caused these atrocities to occur doesn't always mean that the ghosts of those that were hurt will automatically move on. This is exactly what happened here, and it's
why you guys should never go. Number 2 on this list is Friedhof der Namenlosen. This place is a cemetery and it's been nicknamed the Cemetery of the Nameless. Amy Script details the history of this place beautifully by writing, throughout the 1800s, the Danube River, which cuts through Austria, was often littered with bodies. These were usually drowning victims, those who had committed suicide, and often cause of death was unknown. Once the river had claimed these lives, it would carry the lifeless bodies of its victims ashore, hence dumping them in the same area. As even more bodies accumulated, respectful locals sought out solutions to offer them peace. The Cemetery of the Nameless was erected to offer these unidentified nameless people a place to rest, because they could not be interred at any of the Catholic cemeteries in Vienna, probably as many of the victims were of suicide. Bodies were routinely collected and interred at the cemetery, sporting markers listing them as nameless people. Almost 500 people were interred at the original cemetery, which was eventually abandoned. Today, a more modern and smaller segment of the cemetery continues to stand. This burial plot holds the remains of 104 people. Of those buried in the cemetery, 61 remain nameless, whereas others were identified by family or friends. Because of this dark history, this place has been labeled as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the entire world. Disembodied voices coming from these nameless dead can be heard constantly throughout this cemetery. It's believed that the nameless can never truly rest until their identity is revealed. Their souls will never find peace until the world knows who they really were. Apparently, the former caretaker of this cemetery haunts this space as well, and he'll often appear to the visitors. Those that go here have felt like some sort of entity is also pulling at them. Not physically, but as if their souls are being pulled in multiple directions, as if somebody needs your help. This cemetery is definitely on the do not go list if you ever find yourself in Austria. And finally, number 1 on this list is Muscham Castle. Muscham Castle isn't just one of the most haunted spots in Austria or in Europe, it's right up there as being one of the most haunted spots in the world. Ghosts of soldiers, witch trials, werewolves, torturous owners, all of this has happened in the walls of this castle. Starting with the first thing on that list, ghosts of soldiers, there have apparently been over 45 battles that have taken place at this location. It's been said that the ground was soaked with blood during these fights, and they were as gruesome as anything the world had seen to that point. Then, moving on to the witch trials, this place has seen some witches die. In the late 1600s, tons of accused witches were killed here in gruesome ways. Those that weren't murdered had their hands chopped off or were burned with iron, indicating to the world that they were criminals. The rumors of werewolves didn't start until the 1800s, when animals started disappearing from around the area. Then their bodies would start showing up decapitated around the castle, and had the locals living close to the castle believe in a deadly werewolf. Then there were also the rumors that came out about a vicious owner of this castle who would take people inside and torture them before killing them. This was proven when a torture chamber was found in the castle. Obviously, all of this has made the castle one of the most haunted spots in the world. People have said that they get the sensation of hands reaching out and grabbing them from thin air while they're at this castle. Some people have even gone mad after going to this place, saying that it feels like a parasite has entered into their brain. The werewolf has also never been found, and some of the locals believe that it still haunts this place to this day. This castle cannot be visited in any circumstance. It's certainly interesting to research, but visiting it is way too much of a risk. Number 5 on this list is Abbaye de Mortemer. This abbey is located in the French town of Mortemer in the Normandy region and has a deep history to it. In the mid-1500s, this was a prosperous area filled with a bunch of monks. It was a growing town that was one of the most successful in the region. This didn't last too long though. When the 1700s struck, things changed quickly. The men who were funding this town grew greedy and cared little for the people that were living there. The abbey itself started to deteriorate and the monks began moving out. Soon it was a shell of its former self and only had 4 monks that it housed. This wasn't the end though, because in 1789 this abbey saw the worst horror of its history. The French Revolution was at its height and sweeping its way through France. Religion was completely out of favor, and that meant the 4 monks that were living there were also out of favor. When the revolutionaries got to this location and found these monks, they didn't hold back. They took them into the cellar of this abbey and brutally massacred all 4 of them with no provocation. People think that this was one of the main incidents that caused this place to become one with the spirits. Since then, many ghostly sightings have been reported at this spot.
One of the most famous stories was in World War II. A British paratrooper landed in the forest nearby and was spotted by the Germans. He thought he was doomed for until a monk appeared out of nowhere and guided him to safety. It's believed that this is one of the spirits of the dead monks still trying to help those in desperate need. One of the most famous ghostly legends is the woman in white who wanders the grounds. This ethereal being floats through the area and was even photographed once before. Her origin is currently unknown, but it seems that after the monks were killed, this area became home to not only their spirits, but many. Werewolves, goblin cats, and other demonic things have also been spotted here. This place is deeply haunted, and even though that one paratrooper was saved by a ghost, I think that's the exception rather than the rule, and for that reason, I still wouldn't recommend going here. Number 4 on this list is the Château de Brissac. This chateau in France is located in the Loire River Valley south of the village of Angers in France. It's a very beautiful chateau and extremely unique because it's actually a mix of 2 different chateaus. In the early 11th century, an initial castle was built on the land, but then several hundred years later, in the 15th century, the land was taken over by the Duke of Brissac, who had his own vision for the space. He tore down most of the castle except for the twin medieval towers and then built around those, so you get this very interesting style of chateau. This chateau is also apparently the tallest in all of France. The great beauty of this castle and unique architecture aren't the only things that distinguish it though, because it's also one of the most haunted. An expert on the castle named Wesley McDermott gives great insight into the entity haunting this building, where he says, "A double murder that occurred sometime in the 15th century within the walls of the castle has resulted in one of the more popular ghosts of the Château de Brissac, that of the La Dame Verte, or Green Lady. The current residents, the Duke of Brissac and his family, have become accustomed to her roaming the rooms, but she has scared many a guest. She's often seen in the tower room of the chapelle wearing her green dress. What's most terrifying, however, is her face. If she looks at you, you'll see that her face has gaping holes where her eyes and her nose should be, resembling a corpse. As well as her sighting, her moans are often heard throughout the castle in the early hours." After researching this, I found that Wesley was correct, and there is no end to the stories and encounters people have had with this Green Lady. I honestly do recommend going to this castle to look at its beautiful exterior. Going inside, though, is something that I wouldn't do. Number 3 on this list is the Sonian Forest. The Sonian Forest has a very strange phenomenon that occurs in it, which is locals believing it's haunted. Culture Trip says Diogen is a strange fog that hovers in the Sonian Forest near Brussels. The fog has been described as greenish, but is also gray, orange, or white. What's consistent in the descriptions are small shadowy figures in the fog and the sound of laughing children. The name Diogen is a misspelling from the original name Diogen, which literally translates to the eyes. It's called the eyes because there's always something large in the fog that stares at you. There have been reports of the figures near the forest that dart in front of cars, and a bloody little handprint on the car window that leaves as soon as the fog is gone. A bloody little handprint. That is a big no thank you from me, guys. This sounds like something that has come directly out of a horror film and something that should be avoided at all costs. Nobody knows why this fog appears, but the general consensus is that some very powerful ghostly entity conjures it. Who this entity or entities is, or why they reside in this forest is unknown, just that they're extremely powerful. Locals are also very scared of this spot, and it's become infamous for disappearances throughout the years. Unless you want to disappear in a greenish smoke, I'd avoid it at all costs. Number 2 on this list is the John McCrae Bunker. Ypres is a city full of history. You could almost say it's haunted by history. Step into the quiet Essex Farm Cemetery by the canal to uncover a ghostly site. The bunker is supposedly haunted by poet and physician John McCrae. Many ghost hunters who come here claim to hear echoes of voices, gunshots from World War I, or even witness the ghost of John McCrae and his friend Alex. The bunker is a memorial site in honor of John McCrae's memory. He wrote the famous poem In Flanders Fields for friend and fellow soldier Alex Hemmler. Hemmler died on the battlefield, and McCrae followed not long after, passing away from pneumonia.
Some say that after hearing gunshots, you'll see flashes of Himmler's ghost. Many European countries have at least one site that is haunted by the ghosts of soldiers, usually from World War I or World War II, and this bunker is Belgium's. It just so happens to be a very famous soldier though. Growing up in Canada and being Canadian, I've read and heard the poem In Flanders Fields many times. It honestly makes me really sad to hear this legend and know that John McCrae's soul has yet to find peace and still clings to earth in what I can only imagine is a horrible purgatory state. If you do ever go to this place, then make sure to show some respect to him, his friend Alex, and all the other soldiers who lost their lives here. Maybe that's what his soul needs to finally pass on. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Crypts of Laeken. These crypts are very close to the royal crypts of Belgium, but have been dubbed far creepier and far more haunted. Crypts are usually pretty creepy to begin with. One of the most haunted spots in the world is the Paris Catacombs after all. These get especially riddled with ghosts though after they've been abandoned for a long period of time. And that's exactly what went down at the Crypts of Laeken. For 30 years these crypts were completely forgotten about and abandoned, and those that were kept here just rotted away underground. 30 years later, a cemetery was built over top of this place and people started coming back. When they went down there again though, it wasn't how they remembered it. Creatures, dark beasts with red glowing eyes and an appetite for apparently only flesh live down there now. These underground crypts that stretch super far used to be only the home to the dead, but now they're also the home to these demon things. I personally see no appeal to going down to an ancient abandoned underground crypt anyways, but throw on some werewolf wannabes and this is definitely a spot that I'd avoid.
Number 5 on this list is the Chateau de Camargue. The Chateau de Camargue is located in Périgord, an ancient region of France. The chateau isn't as beautiful as it once was, some of its former glory lost to time and also to war. This chateau was a critical point of interest in the 100 Years' War between France and Britain. It was the host to one of the more brutal fights that the war ever saw and was eventually captured by the British. As was typical back then, when you captured a place, many of the people that were running that place were either captured or put to death. One person of interest was put to death by being beheaded, and that was the young lover of the daughter of the Earl of Camargue. It's said that this man was deeply in love with the daughter and that she was in love with him as well. His beheading didn't seem like a major point of interest to the British at the time, but it actually left a bit of a spirit behind. What's really interesting about this story though is that it wasn't the spirit of this young man that was left behind, it also wasn't the spirit of the young daughter or even the Earl of Camargue himself. In fact, it was the spirit of this young man's horse. The horse that this young man rode into battle with to attempt to defend the chateau, and the horse that he had his whole life. Its ghost has yet to pass on. It's said that the ghost of this horse wanders the grounds of the chateau searching for its master. People who have ventured into the castle have reported hearing the clicking of hooves and a deep groan from a horse. People have also reported seeing this dead horse's ghost walking around the grounds of the chateau as if it was defending it from potential invaders like it did in the past. It's suggested that if you do intend to visit this chateau, that you don't bring any negative energy with you. The horse could potentially interpret this as a threat and come after you. Some have even suggested bringing a carrot or an apple and leaving it at the front of the chateau as a sign of good faith towards this ghostly steed. Number 4 on this list is the Palace des Tuileries. The Palace des Tuileries is home to one of France's most known ghosts who has been nicknamed the Red Man. The Red Man has been around for several hundred years and has 2 potential stories of origin. The first story talks about a man nicknamed Jack the Skinner worked for Catherine de Medici after her husband Henry II died. He worked as a hitman for her and would be sent to murder potential political foes. He was exceptional at his work, but eventually there grew a time where the Queen was worried that he knew too much about her. After all, he knew exactly how many people she had had executed considering he had done the executing. To make sure her secrets were safe, she had another man murder him. He killed him in the garden, which I should note is typically the area linked to this haunting, and then he left his body in said garden. When he came back to fetch the corpse, it was missing. Then, the Queen's astrologist told her that he foretold some great disaster happening to the people of Tuileries and that John would be at the forefront of it. Since then, whenever the Red Man appears, it's said that a tragic event will happen to the people surrounding his appearance. The second origin story is that when this palace was built, the Red Man was already there. This ghost spoke to Catherine de Medici and foretold her death, and even though she forsook him and the palace that she had built, the prediction he had made turned out to eventually be true. Pierre-Jean de Béranger, a famous French poet, describes the Red Man as being a small man clothed from top to toe in scarlet, whose eye is so piercing and unearthly that it terrifies the most courageous. He never speaks, nor are his visits of much length. He vanishes soon after his presence is discovered. This has been echoed throughout time, as many French nobles have received visits from the Red Man before. Henry IV, Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette have all had visits from him in the past. There's even a story talking about how the Red Man appeared in front of Napoleon right before his death. There are tons of beautiful palaces in France, and if it was me, I'd avoid this one and go to one of them. Better to be safe than sorry when we're dealing with a devil-like demon whose presence means impending doom. Number 3 on this list is Grès-les-Bains. This is a commune that is in the southeastern part of France. The reason why this town is so haunted is because of all the conflicts that have taken place there over the years. If you name any significant war that has happened within France, it's most likely that at some point or another, a battle was fought at this place. This has caused a lot of untimely death of soldiers and also the civilians who were living there. All of this death has left some spirits behind and made it so that this town is deeply haunted. Even though this is a town, the area that is most haunted seems to be located close to the castle at the top of this town. The reason that I say at the top is because this is a mountaintop village, and the way that this town is laid out has the castle right at the zenith. Therefore, everything is cascading down from this haunted castle that towers over the rest of the residents. There isn't one ghost who lays a rule to this town, but a collection of ghostly spirits. It's said that if you walk around the castle at nighttime, then many voices will start to speak out of thin air. Shadows will dance on the walls as if someone is around you, but once again there'll be nothing. People also report having a deep sense of uneasiness when they're in this area and feel unwanted. The ghosts here don't sound as dangerous as some of the other ones, but I still don't recommend checking this place out. Number 2 on this list is Château de Blain-de-la-Tour. This is a castle that is located directly in the village of Blain-de-la-Tour. This castle certainly isn't the most ornate in nature. It looks to prioritize functionality over beauty. This was largely because its main use was during the 100 Years' War, and the French wanted to make sure it wouldn't get captured by the British. This castle is very unique with its haunting. It's always haunted by one specific ghost, which I'm going to get into, but on one particular day of the year, this place goes off the rails with paranormal activity, and it's this event that has given the castle the title as the most haunted castle in all of France. At midnight on All Saints' Day, which is on November the 1st, it's said that a plethora of phantoms will fly out and circle around the tower of this castle. They will scream and wail and cause a major ruckus. People have also said that these wailings feel inherently sinister in nature, almost as if these ghosts are driving people away from this place. Reports have also said that chains can be heard smashing against the walls, and screams from below in the tower are heard as if people are locked up there. This event only takes place on November 1st at midnight though, and is now part of the lore and culture around this village. On a regular day, this castle isn't completely without ghostly apparitions though. The ghost of the master of the castle from the 11th century walks throughout in a bloodied outfit. It's said that he was murdered with a dagger, and that his spirit walks around to this day still holding that same dagger which killed him. Number 1 on this list is Château de Bonneguil. This castle is located in the Saint-Front-sur-la-Masse and was built in the medieval ages. It's decently well kept considering how old it is today. As with most castles that were built around that time, this one played a critical role in the 100 Years' War. It's said that it was fought over multiple times and retaken by both sides multiple times as well. Aside from its deep history, reports of a potential haunting have run rampant all throughout France. In fact, people were so convinced that a spiritual presence was living here that a team went to go investigate it. This group of paranormal experts went in and made some startling discoveries. They said that when they got there, the thing that they noticed and detected the most was the sensation of somebody touching their shoulder, as if somebody was right behind you and had their hand just on one of your shoulders. This went hand in hand with a sensation of burning. Apparently the burning didn't have them in pure agony, but they were all reportedly uncomfortable for sure. The temperature changes didn't stop there either, because it also got incredibly cold all of a sudden. Creepy noises, loud shouts, and a very guttural and deep moan that echoed throughout the castle were all things that this group had reported as well. Nobody knows who or what ghostly spirit is causing these occurrences, but it's clear that something isn't quite right about this French chateau.